Hello, everybody. Welcome to February 16th edition of the SIG Network meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down to pretty much be nice to one another. If you have anything to add to the agenda, feel free. We have a fairly sizable agenda, so it might get bumped to next week, but go ahead and add it anyway. Hopefully you can now see the deck.
And by next week, of course, we mean 2 weeks from now.
Sorry, 2 weeks from now. Thank you. And we'll get started with triage. So Antonio, why don't we start with you? You brought up one that was closed that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I wanted because this is an example of the how a small change can have a big impact and how long it takes us to detect it. And this was detected by chance by Paco Chu. So the history is in the CI. We set up the kube-proxy IP table sync period to 10 seconds. And I was debugging a test, and that can become racy in some situations. So I was checking some graphs and doing some experiments, and I say, well, we can use 1 second. It should be good. And it seemed that it was good. But after 4 months, if you scroll down and go to the graphs, you can see that we reduced the latency, we reduced the network program latency, but we increased the DNS lookup latency. Those are 5,000 node clusters. And this is an example that small changes can have a big impact, and we should be careful. And this time I broke it. It's only the CI, but as you can see, it's an ugly regression. The good thing is that there is one change from language that reduced the latency. The high percentages of 95 and 99 now are much better with this change. So this graph, the graph with the cycle. So if you see the latest one, the 95 and 99 percentile, those improve, and the other. That's when I reverted my change.
Cool, good catch to you guys. And
no, thanks to the Paco for reporting. Well, that's the other thing is for people that want to test things, we have this test running in Kubernetes. So I mean, it's go to SIG scalability and ask them, and they will be happy to show you how to run them.
Cool. All righty. So next up, I was looking at issues, and there's only one that was open recently that doesn't have an owner, and that is kube-proxy does not validate health Z state when answering to HC for ETP local.
Yeah, I opened this. This is because this spiral out of that KEP that I had filed for 1.27, whereby we agree that this should be treated as a bug and hence dealt with accordingly.
But you are going to fix it, right?
I filed a PR for it already. I think if you just scroll down, you'll see the PR should be, yeah, right there.
Cool, thank you.
Assign it to you.
I assigned it to you, actually. I hope.
No, to me, no. Definitely is.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay. Then we probably don't need to spend much more time on this one for today because it's in hand and Tim just picked it up, and we'll get.
I just assigned it.
Thank you.
I did want to talk about one other one for triage. Light week this week, which is kind of awesome. The other one that I thought was interesting. Well, there's a CNI issue open, which I didn't read yet.
Zappa's grabbed that one.
Okay, so Mike, you got it. If you think it's a real bug, triage accept it. There's a new bot. You may have noticed. The new bot goes through old issues and untriages them, forcing the SIGs to reevaluate whether we really want to look at these old bugs or not. It ignores
Yes,
frozen.
we're talking about the 2018 one here.
Yeah, it ignores issues that are lifecycle frozen. So we might also want to go through and sort of unlifecycle freeze things that are really old. Because if you go like to the last page of SIG network issues, there's some really old ones that we probably should discuss again. And I picked a few of those for my backlog grooming. But this one, network policy proposal, extend network policy to layer 7 is a 50K range issue from 2018 filed by none other than Thomas Graf. And I thought it was worth talking about a little bit here at the SIG. Is this something we want to consider, or should we close it out? Is Kubernetes proper ever going to have policy at L7?
We were having a discussion on that, right, Dan? Like on this network policy, having something not called network policy, but something else, V2, as we did with Ingress V2, which is kind of gateway API instead. So, sorry, Antonio. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I was going to ask the same thing. Is this not gateway API doesn't have these things of route filters or all these things?
It could be. Is gateway the API for new policy also?
We've already
I
got
can
a
see
lot
somebody
going
making a
on.
case for it, but yeah.
Yeah.
I can see someone definitely pushing for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually come up in some meeting or issue at some point. So I know, and I know certainly if you squint at it, and look at our API and look at what an L7 network policy API would look like, I can see similarities. We just have so many other things we're trying to prioritize first. I don't know.
Well, the good news is this has been open for 5 years, so no rush.
Sorry, Tim. I think that I kind of got misunderstood on that. I'm not pointing that this should be gateway API. What I was saying is that during our network policy meetings, we were kind of discussing having some new network policy, but not calling that V2 because we are never going to have a V2, right? Getting compatibility with V1. So what we've been thinking, actually, Dan and Andrew, was creating some similar thing that is like network policy V2, but with a different name, as gateway API was like the Ingress V2, but was never the Ingress V2, right? So we don't have this kind of confusion, and probably we should move that to that effort. That's my point on that.
We actually discussed it just 2 weeks ago when we looked at Dan Winship's doc, sort of how if we should add in layer 7 as part of moving forward.
I think we brought it up in oh yeah, this is something we should think about, but
exactly.
I don't think anybody was especially either super for or super against it.
No, exactly.
I mean, I think layer 7 policy is a really important aspect of a complete system. And I'm also not sure that it's Kubernetes' problem or right to solve.
Yeah, but what layer 7 means here? The HTTP paths or all the gRPC or blah, blah, blah things? That's the thing.
Exactly. Like, look at what like Istio does for layer 7 policy, right? Like they do traffic sniffing on inbound packets to try to figure out if you're speaking MySQL. Like, are we going to do that? I don't think so.
Yeah, I tend to lean that way.
But we could offer the support to basically forward, if you have a layer 4 policy like we have now, that you would send it on basically service chain to layer 7 function that would do handle that and be able to evaluate the layer 7 policy.
But is that something that Kubernetes defines, or is that something that some other implementation defines? Like Istio already kind of does this, right? Yeah, Bridget, you're exactly right. Istio kind of does this already transparently. Like you, as a user, you don't need to know that you're using a service mesh, and it can do packet sniffing, or it can be disabled to figure out what L7 policies it wants to apply. And then there's a policy language that it uses to define what does a MySQL policy look like as different from an HTTP policy, right? I don't know. I'm very wary of Kubernetes opening that can of worms because there's a lot of worms in there.
I'm particularly wary of it in lieu of anybody being really noisy on this issue. Like doing it's one thing, but then doing it when nobody's like apparently beating down our door to do it, I think is another. So I would lean towards we close the issue. And then if somebody really wants to start beating down our door, they can, and we can reopen it and talk about it more.
I mean,
But
I'd ask the
without
question.
an advocate.
I'd ask
Dan?
the question, why do we think we could do a better job here or a more consistent job here over the long term than somebody else like Istio? And maybe there's an argument for standardizing something there, but still it seems like a really big space to try to standardize that.
Agree.
We should also just add a forwarding to the gateway gamma, right? Because isn't that basically kind of this? If that's like standardizing
Maybe.
I mean, in
kind
theory,
of.
this could apply to HTTP connections that were not service, right? Like in theory, you might want to have L7 network policy for some external service that pods are connecting to.
Go ahead.
Right, but that I think like that is within the scope of the gamma stuff, that they're converging the service mesh descriptions.
So there's an opportunity,
which means we can close it.
There's an opportunity to say within the gateway framework, this is where you would attach policy resources, but policy resources aren't defined by the gateway API.
Exactly.
And standardization doesn't necessarily mean it has a Kates.io API. It could mean it has an Istio.io API, or it has a Cilium.io API, because those are both CNCF projects too. Like, we don't need to own everything. In fact, that's poisonous, right?
I agree. That's I didn't say it well, but I mean, forwarding into the function that can do it. But we also, and it's not in here, but at some point need to start looking at, should we try to do something around quick? I would say it's really, really hard to do. Multipath TCP, we have more and more encryption everywhere. So how do we manage that from a service perspective? Are we just going to do TCP and UDP and that's it? And so where would, if anyone wants you to do quick, where would it fit in?
Okay.
Where would the load balancing, is that part of the gate? I don't know.
We are running on time a little bit for this.
Sorry.
Yeah. For the sake of time, I think we're all violently agreeing. For the sake of time, I'll capture some of the notes of what we discussed, and I will go ahead and close that issue, and we'll take it off the triage board. Back to you, Shane.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, cool. So that's extension to triage, and I think we should probably time box it a little bit. For backlog grooming, finding old issues and bringing them up that we started doing a couple weeks ago. Tim, I think I already have this one open. Is it this one? No, it's not this one. It's one of these. I'll just reopen it.
It was the one that linked here is port ranges or whole IPs.
Okay, so support pull ranges or whole IPs and services from 2016.
Yep. We got as far as actually having a cap, and then we didn't follow through with it because it was hard and there wasn't a ton of obvious demand. I think everybody thinks, yeah, we probably need to do this, but unless somebody feels like I need to do this, it's not getting done. And I will note that it is currently marked as lifecycle frozen, which I'm going to remove right now. And force us to reevaluate this issue periodically. Anybody have thoughts, like new ideas or new burning inputs into why this is actually really important and we're idiots for not doing it?
Just quick clarification there. Is the question either port ranges or whole IPs?
I think the question is something better than individual singleton ports.
If I remember correctly, wasn't there some discussion around, well, port ranges might be hard or otherwise more complicated. So one way
That's
to
right.
deal with that was let's just do whole IP and then we skip port ranges entirely.
That was where the KEP sort of ended up.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
But
the problem was with IPVS, right? Sorry then.
I was just going to say, but the KEP then ran into all sorts of problems with whole IPs. So could have turned out that maybe port ranges would have been better.
I mean, what I recall was port ranges were simply not implementable in like IPVS. Like there isn't a affordance in IPVS for doing a range. You can do a whole IP with a sort of weird, the persistent flag. And you could do a single port, but you couldn't do ranges. And in IP tables, you couldn't do remapping, which I think is okay. We could ignore that. We could waive that feature away in the face of ranges. But you're looking at NF tables. What are the capabilities of NF tables here?
Probably about the same as IP tables.
I mean,
Barry, you got a hand up?
Yeah, the alternative is to use it as a notation, right? That's a short form today. What you'll do if you want to automate this, probably that you have a function that runs over your sort of the definition with a range and makes it single entries. You could do the same thing in any backend, right? Yes, you cannot use the port range. You will have to generate a rule for every port in the range, which of course can be very costly if the range is like 3,000 ports, but anyone doing 3,000 ports should be, well, deserves problems. Because if we add it here, you also probably want to do something with the service. How do you map into this? Do you want to have a service over ranges? So,
yeah, I mean, I'm afraid the first thing people will do is want to turn on 60,000 ports, like everything except the bottom 1K, right? And then IPVS is forced to open code 64K virtual servers.
And that will collide with some other program that's, it's like it. So,
I
mean, it's obviously
I personally
working to do singular ports today. No, I don't think there's any application that doesn't work for this. It's just a matter of easiness and perhaps so ease of reading, and so I think just leave it.
We leave it fall into.
Take it. I mean, say that there is a way that works by specifying port by port, and that's how it will have to be.
Well, I mean, it actually doesn't work because there's a limit on the etcd resource size. So if you go and open code 64K ports, I don't think etcd will store it for you.
But then writing the container specification with all these ports will be pretty tough as well. There's so many places you need to change in.
Yeah, I don't think that's a practical answer. I think we could get away with saying, here's how you specify the whole IP will be forwarded with no remapping. But I don't think we can get away with saying, like, realistically, it's either specifically list your ports and they better be a relatively small number, or that's it. So personally, I would love to see us go back to this. I think the biggest issues we ran into with the KEP were around API and expression, and how do we express this in the API given the constraints that we've already laid for ourselves around ports being a required field and so forth.
So would you then say that, okay, you set the IP, but if you want to do a service, that you would pick a specific specific ports for the service, and then assume that the pod has implemented that, even though it's not possible then to map, of course?
Yes, I mean, it would be take that whole IP address and forward the whole thing on to one of the backends, and some of the sort of clever parts of service would not be applicable. Shane, I see you waving the clock there.
Yeah, so there's of course problems with that as well. Anything that comes in fragments will have to keep track of. I know, yeah.
There's issues with affinity, like is it all ports have the same affinity? There's a lot of issues to solve.
It's gonna be this, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like this falls into the fairly common category we have of things that are open but won't be moving that we talked about last time, and we need to come up with some kind of solutions for. But like removing lifecycle frozen for now may be good enough as an action, I think. And then we just need to keep following up on how we're going to better organize some of these issues that need champions, which I think this is basically the problem that we have here, right? I mean, there's technical problems we want to talk through, but the big overarching issue is that somebody needs to champion it, and nobody's ready to right now.
I'll capture some notes in this one too, just to indicate that we talked about it so that the bot will be happy and not bring it back to us. And to suggest if somebody wants to pursue this, we're not against it. We just know that it's some challenges. Is that fair?
Help wanted. Sounds good to me.
All right.
Why don't you proceed with the agenda? You don't have to go over all these things for multi-networking anyway, so put it in as a point that it needs to be looked at.
And we have other issues in the backlog, which are of the same, like, we'd like to do this, but we're sort of constrained by API compatibility that we need to talk about at some point.
Roger that. Is anybody opposed to jumping forward and saving some backlog grooming for next time, given the time that we're at?
Go for it.
Then I would like to open it up for Antonio
Sounds
to do his
great.
demo.
Oh, okay. So let me share the screen.
Yep.